Hey everyone, it's great to see you again. I'm excited to welcome you to this next session on what the future holds for application security. I'm Amir Kazemi, Director of Product Marketing, and I'll be your host for the session. To help me look into the crystal ball of what's coming in the future of AppSec, I'm super delighted to introduce you to Narendra and James. And, welcome to you both. If you don't mind giving the audience, a quick intro before we get started, that would be awesome. Why don't we start with you, James?
Sure. My name's James. I started Latio Tech to try to cut through marketing noise on CNAP specifically. But before that, I've been a security engineer. I've only been doing Latio for 2 months, so I think I'm still recent enough to still say I'm a security engineer first. So, yeah, I've been at small companies, big companies, FedRAMP, non-FedRAMP, and so just a lot of different security engineering stuff.
Great to have you on board, James. Thank you. Narendra, would love to hear from you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Amir. My name is Narendra Ramakrishna. I currently work as a director for security architecture in one of the financial organizations in East Coast. Number of years of experience in security governance and architecture practice predominantly. I come from a lot of experience in the utility space as well as financial organizations. In fact, I started my security career, so to speak, in one of the banks in the UK. Uh, Beyond that, a number of different experiences going along. So that's I'm think of me as more as a practitioner from a security perspective. So that's me.
Awesome. Yeah, great to have you on board and looking forward to your insights here. Why don't we start a little bit broader? So, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around some of the biggest shifts that are driving the industry to kind of evolve their application security strategy. And wanted to get your thoughts. What do you think those shifts are? And maybe we can start with you, Narendra.
Yeah, I think some of the aspects in terms of what's happening from application security strategy perspective is CISOs are thinking differently in terms of applications, right? I mean, especially there are regulatory pressures which are largely contributing into the need for having application security as a practice. That's what I've observed in predominant cases. The other cases have been, there are specific security needs which actually shoots beyond compliance and look for actual security. So that's another aspect to consider. And you can't really ignore the third aspect, which is a post breach scenario where you got to bring in application security components beyond a specific breach that has already happened. So I think those are largely the drivers that I can think of at this point in time, which is driving some significant application security strategies.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
think
Love that.
all the I think some of the challenges with application security specifically that are growing is very core. It can be compared really well to cloud security as far as how every organization had some amount of IT infrastructure, and that shift to the cloud necessitated like new toolings, challenges, visibility issues with cloud security, which then expanded into an industry. And I think now
Mhm.
there's more and more this realization that every company is becoming like an application software company. Like I work with a lot of very small businesses that still have some sort of proprietary software, and they typically have some level of heartburn around the security of it. And I think that generally drives, combined with the different regulatory developments like Narendra was pointing to, this new emphasis on application security as it continues to apply more and more broadly to more and more people. Whereas before, I think it was a very niche sort of security thing that like Cisco and Microsoft did. Whereas now it's
Mhm.
really coming into its own as a full uh, discipline that everyone needs to have.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys were to think more about kind of the strategic drivers around your own AppSec program, what would those drivers be to kind of establishing that AppSec program? Maybe like give me two, three, or four points there if you don't mind. We'll start with you, Narendra.
Yeah, I think for us, I think one of the key drivers for the recent application security program that we had was a regulatory compliance. In
Yep.
fact, we would lose the license to operate in a specific state if we did not comply to some of the application security requirements that the regulatory compliance requirements actually had as part of. I mean, it was very specific in terms of what it is asking for, right? It required us to ensure that there is policies and procedures and all of the policy or the administrative controls in place. And more importantly, it actually ascribes certain ownership to CISO in terms of having ownership of specific application security components that you would have as part of an organization. I think that's primarily the reason, but also I
Yeah.
think again it's a financial organization, so we are dealing with a mix of modern and legacy technology stack. Taking
Mhm.
care of some of the security aspects there as a combination of those two becomes pretty important. So I think that was the secondary driver, which actually moved us along the path of having an AppSec strategy and an implementation thereon.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
think for us, it's mostly been around customer success in the form of like customer trust, and then also just
Mhm.
like sales drivers. Just over the course of a lot of my career, is that's the tie to security in general is usually like that's why a
Mhm.
lot of organizations first step is a SOC 2 because their first enterprise sales all of a sudden they're saying, "Hey, give us your SOC 2," and then the founder's saying, "Oh, what's a SOC 2? What's how do I get that?" And so
Mhm.
that's usually how people onboard into that and then develop from there. But for me, beyond just that general thrust for security, application security was the result of like learning cloud security and learning that for most organizations, I think cloud security really is application security because you start down this posture of like getting a CSPM tool and starting to get insight into your workloads. And then you get that insight and you're like, how do I fix any of this? And then you have to go start talking to developers and they're like, oh, well, it's
Yeah.
this Terraform file here, or oh, we've defined our different Python packages in this repo, and you're learning the application delivery chain as a function of trying to do cloud security. And so to me, that's the
Mhm.
driver for the AppSec program. Is it's really coming from if you want to do cloud security, if you want to secure your production assets that are deployed, that starts with application security. But I think a lot of security engineers specifically came into cloud security, similar to how I did from like more of a DevOpsy syseng background with not a lot of like hands-on development time. And so it was a learning process to realize like, oh, what I'm actually trying to do is application security. I'm not actually trying to do cloud security at all. And that's why at specifically organizations like PagerDuty that were super cloud native, super forward thinking in the implementation from day one, I would say that application security was always the focus first because it was more of a developer driven company. But for other companies that are less like tech industry oriented, that's where it's really this longer learning process of, hey, we're actually trying to do application security here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing also, compliance, like customer driven, sales driven. With compliance specifically, do you, as that kind of changes, do you adapt your AppSec program to those compliance or regulatory changes as well?
In fact, it's interesting you asked that because compliance is not it's not a standstill in most cases. So I think what I've seen as part of the industry, especially in the financial industries, there are constant updates to your regulatory compliance requirements. And the AI Act, for example, or the equivalent of the EU AI Act in the US, how do you look at it from the perspective of application security? I mean, again, there is a much broader scope in terms of how do you want to look at things like AI Act. But normally, the starting point for some of the AI components that our enterprises like us essentially go through is normally infused into application security aspects. So I think
Mhm.
it's definitely not a standstill. I think there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of risks that you will see with technologies like AI, low code, no code components that CIOs are slanting towards. So it's interesting in terms of how regulations would evolve in
Yeah,
terms of application security.
yeah.
Yeah, for me, from a security engineer perspective, I think of it as like speak softly and carry a big stick. And compliance is the big stick that you can always just whack people with if like things are really bad. But the goal is that your security program, in my mind, should sort of be this leading indicator of, hey, we're experimenting with Gen AI. We're not worried about this AI compliance framework yet. We just have a security program and we want to figure out like what does LLM security mean? What are some of the approaches to it? There's like the OWASP top 10 for LLM is very new and changing rapidly. And like that's sort of like the bleeding edge of this stuff. But then compliance comes up over time and says, hey, here's sort of the baseline that if you haven't figured it out yet, like here's what you actually have to do. And I think in application security, though, more broadly, compliance is actually really, really confusing because application security, I think, is really, really hard. And you start talking about things like 90 days to remediate a high vulnerability, or 30 days rather. Like what kind of vulnerability? Like, is that for SCA, for container, for SAST, for DAST? Like, what's a high for something that's not a CVSS score? Like, there's a lot of questions that sort of get left up for interpretation, I think, specifically within application security, that make the compliance challenge a little difficult, right? Like, we still don't really know, like, where do I have to provide an SBOM from? A lot of the answer becomes like everywhere. As, okay, well, what is that? Do I start on the developer laptop? Like, what do you really want? And I think we're still defining from a compliance standpoint, how we really want to do application security as far as like attestation, scalability, and those sorts of requirements.
Yep, yep. I kind of want to change topics here and hit on the point on AI specifically. A lot of data shows that engineers are saving upwards of 25 plus percent just using AI tools. Are we also, in your opinion, speeding up the creation of insecure code with all these developers just leveraging AI? Would love your thoughts on that. Maybe we'll start with you, Narendra.
Absolutely. I think AI, in the context of application security, unless you ask a specific question, it will not provide protections that are necessary when it is generating the code. That's what I have seen so far. You have to know in terms of what question to ask to that particular Gen AI engine for you to get protections that is generated as part of your code. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting any protections. So yes, I mean, I would want to consider any code that is generated by the AI is by default insecure. That's my posture at this point in time. So I would want to take a stance that it is insecure by default if you have generated the code using any of the Gen AI tools. Again, I think there is another important threat vector that you can start thinking about, not just from the perspective of productivity gain or insecure code. It makes very easy for a developer now who had no skills earlier to implement certain backdoors and obfuscate it and interleave with the code without you realizing it. I think that's a hard problem that application security practitioners should start thinking about, because gone are the days when there was comprehensive code reviews that you would want to do as part of a huge amount of code base that you have. So you have to rely on tools, and tools at this point in time are not ready for such interleaved, obfuscated code that is generated and implemented as part of your larger code base. Again, that's my take on it. I'm just watching this space really close, so interested in terms of what's happening in there.
Yeah. I love the topic around insecure code by default is a good motto there. So, hey, James, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, to me, it's the same as any like low level developer code, where it's the same. I don't view the nature of Gen AI code to be any different because it tends to just be lazy the way a lot of people are lazy in terms of like not thinking through totally the picture. I mean, you're totally right, Narendra. From like even just making the Latio site myself, like barely knowing JavaScript when I started it, like there's a lot of Gen AI stuff happening on that bad boy. And sure enough, like one of the DAST companies that I listed had done some pen testing for fun and like figured out how to break the upvote mechanism. Which this is not an advertisement to go break my upvote mechanism, but for sure, the Gen AI was interested in like making the thing work, not in like securely making sure there's isolation and authorization checks, thinking about how to move between different frameworks. Like these are really high level application problems that if you were to ask it like, hey, what would a secure implementation of these multiple technologies be, it could probably tell you. But if you're just asking it to code an auth system, it's just going to make something that works. And I think ironically that's a lot of the same flow that enterprises get into, where they feel like they suddenly have this big security mess on their hands. It's because they essentially did the same thing, right? Like when Latio had 0 users, I really didn't care like how secure specific mechanisms were on it. But now that there's people actually using it, like I care more, and as more and more people use it, I'm going to care more and more and feel more worried about the security measures around like the upvote mechanisms, for example. And I think that's how just security develops in general. And it's important for tools to have the same fundamentals. Like I don't think AI completely redefines the fundamentals of the code. It just means that yeah, it's going to be happening a lot faster and there's going to be more misconfigurations as a result of it. The same way that if you were scaling and just suddenly hired like 50 junior developers, you would probably also have a lot more insecure code that you had to deal with all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And, inevitably, AI will eventually make us a lot faster, especially on the development side. With that, how do you balance kind of the speed of innovation and maintaining a secure code base internally? Is that more of like a process, a people thing? Is it a change management thing? How do you think about that internally with, your own organization? So maybe Narendra, you can start there.
I think honestly, I'm a business enabler. Although I'm a security guy, I never take a posture of business prevention department. So I would
Mhm.
think 10 times before I say no for a specific code release. But at the same time, I would want to ensure that there are due diligence and checks and balances in place to ensure that the code is safe, right? I mean, again, people process is one thing. I think one of the key aspect is how many people even understand, for example, OWASP top 10 for just for applications. They don't go for APIs or LLMs or such things, but just for applications. I don't think there is awareness within the industry in terms of what does it mean from a developer point of view. In fact, when we implemented Psycode, I think one of the key principles that we use was, a developer self-service. I think that's an important aspect in terms of how do you look at it. Now, once you're trying to embed certain capabilities from a security perspective into the IDE, a lot of things can happen in there from a developer viewpoint, because essentially you are getting the alerts that this code is inherently insecure right in your IDE, and you get the ability to fix the actual vulnerabilities in the code right there. I think that's one thing that you can do to not stifle innovation at the same time ensure that your code is secure. So that's again, there is a lot of complexity in terms of how you need to look at this. But I think right checks and balances in terms of correct security controls, assisted by good tools in terms of ensuring that developers are provided with some level of self-service capability helps a lot in my view. James, what do you think?
Yep. No, I think that goes back to those fundamental features were helpful before and after Gen AI, right? Like to have pipeline scanning and early detection mechanisms and providing fixes to developers. I think the only thing that maybe has changed from like a tooling perspective around some of this is just the increased importance that was already happening on like the threat modeling enablement side, to really plan out your architecture well in advance, so that you're not just discovering like, oh, I guess we're using Hugging Face now because I detect my secret scanner detected token, Hugging Face token once it's already in production. Like, you don't want that to be the way in which you discover that you're using some of these different models and some of the things that are happening. But the fundamentals, I think, haven't changed. It's just again like the scale of. I don't think we ever really solved shift left in terms of making it like make no one feels good about the state of their like how long it takes to fix a vulnerability and where they're at vulnerability wise with application. And so I think Gen AI really just increases the danger there of like, yeah, there's going to be more of them and we're going to be even less happy. And so it's more important than ever that we figure out how we actually want to solve and prioritize the basics of like patch management and getting feedback to developers and secure design together, and investing in AppSec programs more holistically than just being like, oh, I have, two cloud security engineers and they use a CNAP and so I'm good.
Mhm. Yeah. On the flip side, I think adversaries are potentially, using or leveraging AI where they're not slowing down either, right? So, do you think we need to prepare for a future where attackers are going to be using AI against us? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
100%, because I think the cyber warfare is going to be asymmetric going forward. I think the
Yeah.
ability in terms of adversaries generating code out of AI and using it against you, I think the defenders would be on a little bit of a disadvantage in there, because how do you defend against the velocity of attack that you're actually getting from adversaries when they're actually using machine generated code, and they can even do the vulnerability scanning on your application within no time. I just hearing to one of the conversations with one of my colleagues, the actual time that it took for a domain dominance, I mean, again, right from reconnaissance to domain dominance was less than around 35 seconds if you are using correct tools in there. That's interesting in terms of how you look at modern application stack, all the way in terms of its ability to go through all of your tactics in your MITRE attack framework and fulfill your impact expectations. So that's interesting in terms of what's coming our way from an adversarial viewpoint.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
uh I just finished an interview with Joseph Thacker, who you should go follow on Twitter if you don't. And he's a HackerOne guy, and he's experimenting with a lot of these application security exploits using AI and like how to do pen testing better, more automated. And I think we both really agreed in terms of just that it's a huge up level in terms of skill sets. So just to give an example, if I was ever hacking something, hitting a buffer overflow would be my like, maybe I just give up because like I don't know C++. I'm not going to mess with like memory manipulation. It's a little too hard. But now that I have Gen AI, like it's very trivial for me to ask like, hey, here's the CVE with the CVE details. I know this package is on the system. What would a memory exploit look like for this? And it can teach me and like I'm learning how to do the exploit in real time. And I think that that's really what it is it removes the skill barrier to where anyone can become like it really, I think of this as everyone like shifts up a level. Like typically when organizations do risk assessments, you've got like script kiddie level, dedicated attacker level, group level hacker, and then like nation state level. And I think basically everyone has just shifted up a level because of Gen AI and how it can help you do more sophisticated exploits even if you don't really know what you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, would love to hear your thoughts on actually utilizing Gen AI. Like, how are you guys utilizing it on the remediation side? So, if you were to give some examples for our audience out there, in AppSec teams or in an AppSec org, what are some ways that you're leveraging AI from on the remediation side?
I think there is a preamble to usage of AI before you start implementing something. I think that starts still with things like threat modeling. I'm a big fan of threat models. I mean, unless you develop proper threat models, I think you don't know what you're against. I mean, what is it? Is it a web application? Is it an API? What do you need to really? What are your threats that you are going to be mitigating your application against? I think that is where it should start. Once you know, in terms of even if you use some automated generation of those threats or profile as part of your application threat model, it becomes so much more easier for you to ask questions to a Gen AI system to produce code which is resilient or which can protect against those specific attacks. So, in my point of view, I think it probably is easier to look at it from the perspective before you actually start the implementation, start thinking about the threat model, and then start using Gen AI capabilities like, for example, Copilot. I mean, again, there is a caveat there. Unless you ask for it, you won't get it. You only get the features as part of an application code generation. So you should know what to ask. I think that information comes from a threat modeling exercise most of the time, in my view.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it speaks to that defender disadvantage when it comes to Gen AI because very early on, man, I wanted this thing to answer my like FedRAMP vuln management nightmare stuff where I was trying to use it to like do auto risk adjustments and stuff, and like it was just so bad at doing that stuff at trying to know all of your contextual controls, how they apply to your overall environment. Like that sort of abstract thinking was just so not helpful when it came to Gen AI on that front. And I think it gets to this idea that there's a debate that sometimes happens between like is finding or fixing the harder part. And I think Gen AI
Yeah.
has proven that fixing is the harder part. Like I've messed with there's some tools out there that just have like a Gen AI integration as their way to do auto code fixes. And it's like
Mhm.
laughable how bad it can be sometimes where it'll see a SQL injection and then its solution is to like use an ORM and it's just like import this ORM and it's like a random one. Like there's just zero context to the rest of your code base to know how should I actually fix this SQL injection. And that gets to the secure guardrails idea where some people are marketing as though like, oh, secure guardrails is the same thing we've been doing. But the idea is you give a developer the solution to how do we want to fix SQL injection. And they have a place they can go, whether it's your own inbuilt package, whether it's another package that you've agreed as an organization you want to use to solve those problems. And like that's where ChatGPT type AI integrations are really helpful for ideation and like getting a full list of like what can we do for threat modeling, like what are some different attacks that could happen here. It's great at that, but I just don't think it's very good at like the hardest part of like fixing these different things or doing prioritization. And I think that's where it's going to require a lot of experimentation to get those things to a maturity that they're more
Mhm.
useful for defenders.
Yep. No, I love both of your responses on this. I want to leave the audience with one more question here. It could be thought of as a big question, a small question, however you want to think about it. But What are your predictions for the future of application security? Love your thoughts on that one.
So I think organizations will start working with Gen AI models to train models with specific fragments of code, which are at least the patterns which are secure. I mean, unless you have Gen AI models which actually knows as to how to fix a cross-site scripting issue as part of your code, specific to a framework. I mean, it could be React or it could be something else down as part of your API stack, whatever it is. I think there is going to be a lot more organizations that I envisage will start training models based on the fragments of code which are secure, and it will need to improve it continuously, because the rate at which your libraries changes, you have to keep up with the rate of training those models in terms of ensuring the accuracy of what you're getting out of it. I think that race will soon start. I think you will. I'm not seeing that level of precision at this point in time, because most of the security solutions or the recommendations for remediations that I'm getting as part of number of solutions that I've used so far has been very static. It just says, okay, use this particular fragment of code, you're good. But exactly what? I mean, that is something that some of those solutions are not telling me. I think that's where it is going as part of what's happening from an AppSec. As I said, I think largely organizations who are able to train their models with those specific accurate code fragments, which will actually fix the vulnerabilities, which are not discovered as part of your DAST or penetration testing, I think will hold the key for the future.
Yeah, I love that answer from an AppSec perspective. But as someone who loves operations and stopping hackers, like the most thing, like the thing that I'm the most excited about, and I don't know if it's the future. I just know that it's the thing I think is the coolest is all of these like application detection response, cloud application detection response, like all this runtime visibility that we can get now with new tools like OpenTelemetry and in codeless instrumentation for deep application visibility at runtime. Like I think this stuff is amazing and it has the real potential to move us beyond this like WAF whack-a-mole thing. And I really I'll say it's the thing I hope is the future because it is so cool and has the ability to actually stop exploits so we can stop this like G I fixed 10,000 vulnerabilities today, only 90,000 more to go. Mentality that we're doing. And so that's my hope is that we get more runtimey as an application industry.
Amazing. Well, Narendra James, we'll have to wrap it up here. And a huge thank you for your time today and sharing your predictions and insights with the audience. I'm going to be handing it over back to Shauna, but when she'll be taking us on to the next session here. So stay tuned.
Thanks.
Thank you.